Welcome to the SPS Digital Learning Hour.
Brought to you by the Digital Learning and Assessment Department.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Mike Thomas.
And I'm Suzanne Zietz.
We're bringing you the latest news in Springfield Public Schools in regards to technology, along with inspiring interviews from teachers who are using technology in the classroom.
We'll also inform you of the latest updates, practices, and news as it pertains to our district. Whether you are new to using technology in the classroom or are a seasoned vet, we are here to help.
Coming up next, in case you missed it. In case you missed it, this week's latest blog post is all about how to apply SPS-ma in your classroom. So whether you're a gym teacher, art teacher, math, science, English, it's all there with examples on how you can apply technology in the classroom. So go ahead, stroll on over to the blog after you listen to the podcast and check it out.
In case you missed it, if you've been having difficulty when you try to drag and drop files from your OneDrive into your Brightspace course, try again. We realized that we needed to make some adjustments in the permissions for certain roles in Brightspace to allow them to do this. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to email us at DLA Support.
In case you missed it, Microsoft Forms has made a bunch of updates recently, including language updates. So if you are interested in using Forms, they're just like SurveyMonkey or Google Forms. You can embed these directly into your Brightspace course, get nice little charts that come out afterwards, and have a lot of great data that you can look at over the summer.
That's it for In Case You Missed It. Coming up next, Hot Takes.
Welcome back. My hot take for this week comes from EdSurge News. It's one of the companies that I follow on Twitter, which gives me a lot of great ed tech updates. And the article was entitled, How Game-Based Learning Encourages Growth Mindset. And it's kind of, for me, Suzanne, it's one of those jump up and down and shake my arms all around. Yes, yes, yes.
Because we know you love game-based learning.
I do love game-based learning.
And I love growth mindset.
And I do love growth mindset too. I especially learned when I learned about it through Class Dojo last year. So in this article, it talks about how game-based learning is the approach that we need, especially when it comes to teaching math. The article mainly focused on math and not the other subjects, which I thought was okay to help get their point across on how game-based learning is very similar to a growth mindset learning. So when you play a game, a lot of times you have to do these three things. You have to persevere, you have to problem solve, and there has to be some level of creativity with it. And so when you're playing the game, you're going about, these are skills that we consider soft skills, but they're a part of how we do everything. And in the game world, a player, someone who's new to it, expects to struggle at first and not get it. And then they get to go back and they get to do it again. And they get to do it again. And they get to do it again and again until they get it, which is the growth mindset almost in its entirety, which is kind of a fun way to look at it.
Right. It's definitely a fun way to look at it. And I love how students do jump at the chance to play a game and they forget about the fact that they're learning something along the way. So I'm very excited about this twist on learning. Of course, you know, Mike, I love math and I love teaching math. So there's a part of me as I read this that is thinking, wait, we're still trying to get so many teachers to understand how to teach math effectively regardless of technology.
Right.
Is this going to take away from their understanding? Is it going to almost give them an out if they don't like math themselves? Are they going to just be inclined to have students do this game-based learning and still not understand it? But I'm not too nervous because I think overall this will end up helping them in understanding that students learn differently and it may take them time within this game to master it, but they're giving them that time.
Right. And I think it's less about an actual game as it is more about a game philosophy, because the gaming philosophy is very much a growth mindset philosophy, because players start out expecting to struggle, make mistakes, they eagerly replay levels, pushing through barriers to make headway. There is no such thing as failing in a digital game. All you have to do is hit replay and try again and try again. This is a quote directly from the article. And one of the things that they're trying to make the point of is that students or gamers have that growth mindset. They don't sit down and immediately start playing Minecraft and are an expert. They don't sit down and start playing Oregon Trail and are an expert. I've played it enough to know exactly when you should start, what role you should have, so that you make it to the end. And so the idea in games and failing is you get to restart and retry, or depending on the game you're playing, respawn. Most of the students, one of the things that they point out, I actually did the math on this too because I was curious. So there's about 42 weeks of school in a school year. The article talks about, from one study, boys, 99% of boys, so that's just about everybody, and 94% of girls, which is almost everybody, averages between the ages of 12 and 17 playing at least 7 to 10 hours a week. So if you think about that average per week includes school weeks, and so my thought was, all right, so what does that mean for school? And this might seem like a scary number to think about, but it's 300 to 420 hours in a school year that they spend playing games. So if we start adding up the hours after school, before bed, they're playing a lot of games. So they actually have the growth mindset within them. It's just not applied academically.
Right. I think that's the biggest challenge, is helping everyone understand that just because it's labeled game-based learning doesn't mean that they're just playing a game, that they're just having fun. There's actually so much learning going on while they're doing this. And it's intriguing to me how students love to do the game-based learning, and particularly in math, and how much they improve in their math skills using this, versus when I think of some of the classrooms that I've had. And a lot of times within one room, you have 3 or 4 kids who excel at math. And so whatever the lesson is, there's that group that knows the answer right away. And then another group that may take a little more support, but they get it. And then you have another group that needs additional support. And when you're in a group setting, even when you break out and you have a small group in front of you, with that whole class setting, I think there is still a certain amount of peer pressure amongst the entire class. Whereas if everybody's doing this game-based learning, I think that takes away some of that pressure. So someone who may need additional support is not in the spotlight, is not the one sitting there saying, I don't get it, and shying away. Right. They have all the time they need within this game. No one's watching over their shoulder. No one's ridiculing them if they don't get it. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, so they have 3 main points to this article, which I think help kind of break down this growth mindset even more. And the first one is games welcome players of all ability levels in the same environment. Our classrooms can too. So there's always this push and pull with classrooms about setting up classes so that either you've got like your struggling class, your advanced class, and your middle of the road class. Some schools do this, some don't. The article talks about that as achievement gaps widen and class sizes have grown over the last 2 decades, that has been one strategy, is by kind of separating kids out into their groups, which they're starting to see has not been good because, for one, there's no good role model students to help bring up the other students. 2, it creates like a fixed mindset. If you're in the low math class, you know you're in the low math class. I have students that I've talked to that are middle school and high school students. They know if they're in the low math class or not. They know if they're taking Algebra 1 a second year in a row with a whole bunch of freshmen. They know that. And so it creates in their mind that it's something they can't do. And with game-based learning, everybody comes in at the same level. What they pointed out in here was there was a recent study, it doesn't say where the study was from, that found that Algebra 1 is the most repeated class. And grades for Algebra 1 testing go down in the second year for those students who are repeating. And that some schools have started interventions for math as young as kindergarten.
That I completely believe. That's where I taught, was the primary grades. So you can see early on their understanding or lack thereof of numbers. But what I found even more interesting, Mike, in the next paragraph, where it says students with advanced skills can be negatively affected by the ability grouping as well. I'll repeat that. Students with advanced skills can be negatively affected by the ability grouping as well, which I think comes as a surprise to some people, because your first reaction is, oh, if it's a group of students with advanced skills, then they can be challenged and you can give them all kinds of opportunities to continue to exceed. But what I think a lot of people fail to see is that often praise for being smart, high achievers can become risk avoidant. And I've heard this in a variety of articles that I've read and conversations that I've had, that the students who excel are so accustomed to getting that perfect grade and being the smartest one, then some anxiety starts to come into play because they think they need to be perfect all the time and they don't want to take a risk and fail. They feel they have to do it right every time.
I think that's part of the larger issue with the growth mindset and the fixed mindset is when we have these groups, when that advanced group gets together and everybody's being praised for doing well, no one's going to step out and make mistakes. And mistakes in math is where we tend to learn the most. I know for me, I learned how to do long division because of countless mistakes. And even today, I'll make some of those mistakes still, but then I know to go back and double check. I know how to figure out what I did wrong because I am not adverse to taking the risk of making a mistake. And I think in all three levels, if schools are grouping students that way, all three levels get into this fixed mindset where they're either not going to take risks, they already know they can't do it, so they're not going to try as hard, or they know that they're going to be stuck forever in math purgatory because they know their abilities and that's it. There's no growth mindset in it. And with game-based learning, you can turn around and everybody can be in the same classroom. Just like the article you talked about with the personalized learning last week, you could have 70 math students all together and you can have 70 different math levels working all together. The teacher can still teach the main concept for the day and then everybody goes off and works on what they need to, including working and building that concept up more. So that's another thing. I don't want to necessarily jump ahead of myself in the points that I had after reading this article, but I'm going to anyways. When it comes to teaching math, it takes practice, lots and lots of practice. And so whether the student is ready for it or not, they need to have those basic skills before they can jump into the harder things. I've been reading a lot about the difference between spiraling math education and mastery based. Mastery based is all stuck on, here's your skills, you're going to master them. Once you master them, you move on to the next set of skills, and each skill builds off of each other. A lot of spiral is you learn something new, but then you practice a lot of the old. And then you learn something new and you practice a lot of the old. And you learn something new and you practice a lot of the old, with all those new things being added to the old the following day. And so I don't know necessarily where I fall on that scale. I like the idea of mastery based because I remember student teaching, doing a 5-6 grade. So half the class was 5th grade, half the class was 6th, and there would be lots of switching, all sorts of things. The 5th graders were using one math curriculum, which was all about the mastery based. And then they moved up when they started the 6th grade curriculum. It was a lot more investigative. They called it connected math, which is investigations for the older grades, which is a lot more of you're creating your own understanding. But they were able to do that because they had those mastery of the skills prior. So I know that kind of jumps into a tangent off of this.
It does. And now I have two different thoughts going on, and I hope I don't forget my first thought. But my opinion on the spiraling versus the mastery, I do lean more towards the mastery. I understand the benefits of the spiral way of teaching. But from experience, I do know that younger students with that type of curriculum, I found that if they didn't get a particular concept the first time, then the second time it came around, they already had it ingrained in their head that, oh, I didn't get this. I didn't get it last time. And they have given up already. And when it comes the second time or the third time or the fourth time, they've already given up. In contrast to that, when you think of game-based learning, when did you ever see a child give up on whatever game they were playing? I don't think ever. right?
Right.
Even if they fail multiple times at whatever they're trying to achieve, whatever level it is, whatever that game is doing, I've never seen a child give up. And even at their greatest point of frustration, and maybe I'm just thinking of my sons at this point, but at their greatest point of frustration, someone, whether it's a sibling or a friend, jumps in and helps them. And they say, oh, you just need to do this, this, and this. And then they work together to get to the next level, which I would like to believe would be the same, even if it was more educational.
Right. And I think that's what adaptive game, like when we think about like adaptive education and personalized education, that's essentially it, is that you keep working at it. And if you need help, help comes to help you.
Right.
Whether it's a teacher or a video in the game or just some more practice or another way of explaining it. We were at a conference this week and one of the students said sometimes they learn best from a video, even though the teacher had been teaching it. Teacher could have done a great job, but they didn't get the concept till they saw it from another point of view. And so that's part of like adaptive learning and personalized learning, and game-based learning can be very personalized. So again, if we think back to last week and that whole 70 students in a classroom and you're personalizing the learning for them, something like an adaptive game-based learning could be really useful in that. Because what it does is it does a lot of the heavy lifting. As a teacher, I shudder when I was reading last week, like doing 70 different lesson plans or like trying to differentiate for 70 kids. It was hard enough for 20. I can't imagine adding another 50 or 60.
You don't need sleep though, right, Mike?
No sleep's needed. So with game-based learning, with it being adaptive, it does a lot of that heavy lifting for you because it is monitoring the students. You can monitor the students. You can see how they're doing. And it creates a lot of good, useful, applicable data, which is very important when you're thinking about teaching and planning and preparing and trying to not make your students, that would be a bad way to put it, to help your students achieve at their highest levels and beyond. And
always instilling in their mind, you may not have it now, you might not have it yet, but you will get it eventually.
So they talk about, which if you go and you look up our show notes, in this article, they actually give a bunch of examples of games or game-based learning programs that you can use in your classroom at different levels. And so they talk about, in the article, one of those games called Prodigy. I'm probably mispronouncing that wrong. Prodigy, I don't know. Teachers are able to challenge and remediate students' learning as needed, all in the same class period. The GBL game-based learning platform continuously delivers differentiated content, scaffolds, and extensions to students based on their current levels of understanding, allowing teachers to focus precious class time on guided learning. And then, as you know, when kids are playing games, they're very eager when they're playing it, so they want to keep going and keep going.
And going. Which is not a bad thing when they're learning, right? As long as they're learning, we're happy.
Yeah. The second point they make, after that long first point, is gamers embrace challenges and use mistakes to learn. Again, when you make mistakes in math class, that's when you learn the most, because you're not learning anything if you already know how to do it. So it offers students chances to take risks without feeling that pressure of all the people around them kind of silently judging them, which I think it's very important, because to get a student to take a risk nowadays is already hard because they're so focused on doing everything right the first time.
Right, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm noticing this quote from Alina Tugend, I'm probably mispronouncing that, author of Better by Mistake, where she writes that we are raising a generation of children who are terrified of blundering or failing, of even sitting in the discomfort of not knowing something for a few minutes. Think of that. I mean, try to think back of how you felt when you were in first grade, second grade, third grade, or 10th grade, right? When maybe everyone around you knew the answer.
Knew their geometry.
Yes. And you didn't. We don't want our students to be terrified. We don't want our students to be afraid of making a mistake. And I think the whole game-based learning concept just reiterates or supports the collaboration among students. They're helping each other to succeed in this game because to them it's just a game. It's not schoolwork.
Right. And so then almost by osmosis, the skills that they're learning in the games can then turn around and be applied to the tests that they're taking.
Exactly.
One of the interesting parts of this section of the article is they talk about how, like, kind of the difference with math instruction. And in some ways, I don't want to say good or bad math instruction because we all have our own opinions on that. But they say math instructional practices that value speed and memorization do not honor the time and interaction with topics that students need in order to construct meaning. If students aren't able to construct meaning with their math, like how it works, then they're less likely to retain it.
Right. I hope that we get a lot of comments on this. I can only imagine that any math teacher out there is going to have an opinion on whether or not speed and memorization is the way to go. And I won't go off on a tangent because this would definitely get me talking for an hour, but I do see benefits in certain situations of having that speed and memorization, but you can't do that until you do have that complete comprehension of what you're doing. To memorize your multiplication tables and still not understand what you're doing when you memorize those numbers is not going to help you when you have to do 3-digit multiplication examples.
Right. And so I just think, like, when I think of memorization, like you just did, you immediately jump to multiplication facts. We don't think about the fact that we memorized how to add or subtract, like the process to do that. When we think a lot of times about memorization, that's where it comes from. Or this was the one that got me when I was in high school, was memorizing all the formulas for everything and then going to sit down and take the SAT and realizing, like, I knew what the formula was, but I didn't know how to apply it. And I knew how to do my math fast because we were trained. SAT you get 4 hours for. And it's one of those things where it's like you're sitting there and you're going as fast as you can to get as much done as you can. I think back to a couple of years ago when we did Park. That first time when it was timed, you had 70 minutes, or depending on whatever grade you were, 60 to 90 to 120, where you had to get your answer down in a timely manner. Not all of us think that way. Not all of us can have process speed to understand these problems. And so that's where I'm like, oh, I see the point with the speed and memorization. But on the other hand, if you have that constructed meaning, the speed and memorization comes.
Exactly.
So it's almost like one needs to be taught before the other. Like right. You need to have the understanding, and then you can do the memorizing, and then you'll be better off.
I agree. Completely agree on that one.
And so, again, with the whole embracing challenges and learning from mistakes, when you're playing a game, you get that chance to start over. I know we've said this a few times already, but there's that stigma with being like the first kid in the class with a hand up and then being wrong every time. Because I don't know about you, but in my time teaching, I've had those students who immediately raise their hand because they want to answer, but then they have no clue what they're talking about. And you're standing there being like, okay, we're going to try it this way now. So I don't know about you, but I've had those experiences. And for some students, after a few times of that, they would just shut down and not offer up any thoughts or answers anymore because they were afraid of making mistakes, because they could see the looks on their classmates' faces when they made the mistakes.
Right. And this is where I think the challenge is for the teachers to embrace whatever response the student has, put it back to the class, and say, okay, this is one possible solution. What do we think? And just as you would within a game, have everyone offer their suggestions or offer their proof or disproof of why that answer would or wouldn't work. But trying to, and this is going to play into my hot take later, but try and play into the curiosity factor of, okay, well, tell us more. Why did you say that? And what else can we find out? But I mean, it's definitely not easy, right? Because you've got a time factor just in how long you have to teach your students math that day. Not an easy task.
No, it is not. And so that's why when we talk about things like this, we're hoping to help you as a teacher now be able to apply technology in ways that will help your students grow. The last point that they make is games offer immediate, useful, friendly feedback that is designed to motivate students to keep playing. When I read that, it kind of like put a little knife into me, because if I had the opportunity, like they do in game-based learning, to get that immediate feedback, and I was able to give that to 20 students at the same time, I could have been a much more effective teacher. I think we all would, if we can be able to have that time. But as you were just mentioned, there's a time limit to how long you teach math, depending on your day. Maybe you get 60 minutes, maybe you get 90 minutes. Maybe you only get 45, and then you have to come back to it later for another 30. Trying to teach the lesson, have your beginning of your class, your intro part, have your exit ticket, have all of that, and be able to give feedback to every one of those students at the moment they need it. It's like, I could be such a better teacher if I could do that.
Right.
And that's what game-based learning provides, is it provides that opportunity.
Exactly. I mean, how many times I don't, again, we taught different grade levels, but with the real young kids, I would always relate to my own daughter, and I would hate to think of a child in my classroom that was working really hard and improving on their skills, and whatever the task may be. When you've got 25 to 30 kids in front of you, you can't give that immediate feedback to every single one in the class, and I would always feel bad for the one that I didn't happen to get to that day, and so this would eliminate that.
Right, and it would also eliminate when you do get the feedback to them, where does that feedback go? In the trash. Because they're already done with it. They've already learned their lesson, whether good or bad, whether right or wrong. It's already ingrained into them, and it helps develop that fixed mindset, which is what we're trying to get away from, because we want them to have the thinking that they can do anything, that as long as they are working hard, when they're doing those three things that are the pillars of the growth mindset: persistence. Oh, I have to turn my list over because I'm going to forget now. Persistence, perseverance, problem solving, creativity. I know I just said 4 things there, but if students have those things, they can solve any problem, whether it's math, or if you want to apply this to other subjects in science or English. I feel like I read somewhere that, like, not War and Peace, but like The Grapes of Wrath is like written at like a 3rd or 4th grade level, like word wise, but to understand it, you need to be much, much older. And then I think about like reading Harry Potter. Those books, they are difficult reads for anyone who is not in middle school or up. If you're in the upper elementary school, where you find a lot of the books, they're hard for reading and understanding because they're at such a higher level. And so this idea that totally lost my train of thought. It happens. But it's the whole, I'm looking back down on my paper now. So being able to have that targeted feedback. So I don't know where I was going with it a moment before.
Well, you were also talking about the perseverance, the problem solving.
The creativity,
which would allow you to reach higher levels than you would initially think that you were able to. Right? Which is what I'm thinking with those books. I know my daughter was very anxious to read the Harry Potter books at an age that she was too young to really understand what was going on. So she must have had that growth mindset.
Yeah. So while this is all useful information, learning about the game-based learning, it's all about practically how do we apply it. And that's one of the things that we're going to continue to work on. It's one of the things that I'm probably going to blog about a lot next year, because I think that it can be something very useful for a district our size and for the classrooms that we have, the sizes that they are.
And what I loved about this article, Mike, that you didn't mention, at the end of the article, which you will be able to see as a link on
wherever you're listening to this podcast.
So every time Mike would talk about game-based learning, there was a part of me that said, well, I need an example. I have to see it. I don't get it. When I think of game-based learning, I have your Oregon Trail example that you always give me, but I needed more examples. So there's a great list of examples at the end of this article, and it tells you exactly what they're learning and at what grade level it's appropriate for. For example, a game called Deepest Ocean will help students with comparison with inequalities, and that's for elementary to middle school. There's also Pyramid Panic Light, which will help students with lengths, perimeters, and areas and shapes, and that's again for elementary to middle. There's another one, Pinata Fever, which will help students with add and subtracting negative numbers. That is a huge challenge, and that's middle to high school. So there's a long list, but I was so grateful to see this list because it just solidified in my mind what these games can look like.
Yeah, and you also don't need to be a master coder, or you don't even need to change your entire math practice. You can also start small. Traditionally, there's like the intro to classes and then the class tickets out. Like you can start to turn those things into games along the way. Game-based learning doesn't just have to be a computer game. With the adaptive learning, you can have your exit ticket, your class openers, and then once you're comfortable with that, you can continue to add in segments into your class, which eventually leads to having like a flipped classroom or a blended lesson. That gets all that differentiation out there.
And there's a detailed description of this, Mike, in the article, because I was going to ask you how much time a teacher could expect to spend during the day on game-based learning for a particular subject.
For creating a lesson or a unit?
Not for creating
or for
the
students
lesson,
using
but for the students using it.
Again, that goes back to the teacher, like however much you're comfortable doing. And so if you're comfortable with just a little, then you do just a little. If you are comfortable with going full force into it, you can use something like Prodigy, or if you have iReady, or there's other games out there that my mind's blanking on for math right now, or going out and trying to create your own if you're that tech savvy. So I think it all comes back to you as a teacher with what you're comfortable doing.
And Mike is looking at me right now because I just had a great idea. And he's thinking, what is Suzanne going to say?
I am.
But wouldn't it be awesome if some of our high school students created a game for the elementary students? I'm sure they could do it.
I'm sure they could too. I can see it being worked into the curriculum somehow so that they reach not only their goals, but also can help teach younger students too. So again, this article was from EdSurge. EdSurge is a great resource. I would check them out if I were you. The article was called How Game-Based Learning Encourages Growth Mindset.
My hot take this week comes from teachhub.com, and the title of this article is 5 Essential 21st Century Teaching Strategies. Again, that was 5 Essential 21st Century Teaching Strategies. So much of the time we hear about 21st century skills that we need to teach students. So this jumped out at me because it was focusing on the teacher, not the student. Mike and I did just have a quick conversation regarding one of the words in the title, strategies. Mike, what do you think about that?
Well, since we're going to jump to that now, after reading the article, and maybe as we're talking, it'll change my mind, but I don't see strategies as the right term here. I think of it more like a characteristic of like 21st century teaching.
Okay, so this will make more sense to you as we get into more depth of this article. When we think of 21st century skills, it means different things to different people. Sometimes that is used when people are referring to skills that students must master, such as problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, and digital literacy.
Now, let me tell you, if I could master problem-solving skills now, we'd be in a great spot. I don't know if that's something we necessarily always master.
We may not master, but we've got that growth mindset, Mike, right?
That is correct.
So other people, when they hear 21st century skills, are referring to it as the ability to collaborate, communicate, and demonstrate skills that will ultimately help students navigate their way in the future. But what this article talks about is the fact that educators today also need to have their own 21st century characteristics and skills. I know just from the time that I've had this job, I have continuously been learning and changing and adapting, and I feel like I am polishing my 21st century skills, and I feel well prepared to continue on. But I think it's something that's easily not forgotten, but not talked about, the fact that so many teachers are also going through this transition and learning along with the students. I think that's something that's very different now compared to 50 years ago, where teachers learned content and they taught it to the students. Now we're all learning together.
Right, because I think a lot when you think 21st century skills, like both examples that you said what some people think, it's not like standard 5.1 or standard 7.2 or writing standard 3. I don't remember what they all are, so I'm just going to stop with the codes because I know codes. And so, but that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about a lot of the things that we consider the soft skills, the collaborating, the communicating, the critical thinking, the problem solving, things that are applicable no matter what is being taught. And those skills are things that we need in life in general, and that they're much harder to teach in isolation of each other. And so I think that might be one of the things that I was getting out of this article too.
Mm-hmm. So again, there's 5 essential strategies, we'll use that word because it's in the title, that they consider. One is teaching strategies to be able to teach to all learners. Teachers need to have the ability to teach and reach all learners. So this is something very common. Everybody has heard this for a long time. The ability to differentiate learning so that all students are able to learn using their own unique style and or by their ability or readiness level. That last piece, the readiness level, is critical in my mind. I think many teachers are accustomed to thinking of different styles of learning, but I'm very interested in hearing from teachers out there how much you are in tune with the readiness level of your students. And I think I hear that term and I think of primary grades, but I have to believe it applies to all grades, and we just kind of lose sight of that fact, but I think it's very important. So the ability of a teacher to reach every one of their learners is critical.
Yeah, I know lately at home, we've been talking a lot about readiness levels with our oldest son when it comes to writing, when it comes to reading. As he's 4 now, and he is starting to want to learn how to write, but so now we have to teach him how to hold a pencil or a crayon correctly instead of how he's holding it now, or whether it's to reading. And reading is a big one to me because, like, if a student's not ready to read, they're going to be behind if they're in school. So in some ways, their readiness level needs to kind of get like pushed forward on them. And so I think back to, like, even when I was in school, there's a quote, or it talks about, at least in this article, Howard Gardner and his theory of multiple intelligences. And one of those things is, like, the students, when they are ready, they'll learn in their way best. And so when we're thinking about readiness, and like you were mentioning, like you think a lot about primary grades, I think reading is one of those key readiness areas, because by the time a kindergartner leaves kindergarten, they're expected to be able to read books, which if they are not ready for, they're either staying back in kindergarten or they get pushed along with the hope that it sinks in at some point. And so everyone can learn to read. There just needs to be when they're ready.
Right. Very complicated subject, Mike, that we're touching upon.
Yeah.
I could go on and on, but I think the benefits of having the technology that we have today, as we just talked about all the game-based learning, and what we talked about last week with the playlists, at least at varying readiness levels, students can still be reached to a certain extent. And I think another point that we can't lose sight of, though, is with those multiple intelligences, the different ways of learning, with all of our conversation about the game-based learning, let's not forget that not every student is going to learn best using that format.
Right.
So it's an ongoing challenge. All teachers know that, right? But hopefully what we're talking about will spark some ideas in some teachers' minds out there.
And how to reach all of their students.
Exactly. The second strategy they refer to is being able to implement technology. This one was I was very curious about their first sentence where they said the ability to not only learn about the new educational gadgets, just the word gadget, it got me thinking, because I haven't heard that word in a while in reference to technology. So I had to sit and think about it. I mean, what do you think of when you hear the word gadget, Mike? Gadgets that will help students learn better and faster.
Gadgets are always like little tricks, is what I think of. I don't necessarily think of a concrete thing. Like a pocket knife is a gadget. A wireless mouse is a gadget. And the way that they're referencing it, an iPad is a gadget. A laptop is a gadget.
That's what I thought too.
We don't necessarily think that way.
Right. It really was very telling to me not only what they think, but what probably so many teachers across the country think. And just how that needs to change, right? That I'm sure there are many, many classrooms that started out with these quote unquote gadgets, and it was something that was supposed to help some students learn, but ultimately it is just a gadget. You need to know how to implement it effectively within your instruction to have it be useful.
What I think that they were trying to get at least, is the idea that technology changes so quickly that as a teacher, you kind of need to be prepared to implement it. Whether it's using Brightspace or Office 365 or Padlet or Discovery Ad, like they change. They don't stay the same. Quite frankly, Microsoft Word, even though it looks similar, it's been around since mid-90s. It has changed, but each change has been so subtle that it's been very different. And then you get into that thought of when you see it, it's like, this is not what I remember. This is not going to be easy. This is wrong. Something's wrong here. Operating systems. So like our laptops, we've talked about getting Microsoft 10 on them because 10 works best with all of our programs. When you have Microsoft 7 or 8, they don't work as well. But people freak out because my screen looks different. What is this circle on the bottom of my screen? It's Cortana. She can help you find things. What is a Cortana? But Cortana has always been a part of the computer. It just was not called Cortana. It was just called Search. And so even like the way it's all laid out, like I like Windows 10 now because it reminds me more of Windows XP. With the screens that it has, just more pictures than XP did. And so being able to adjust on the fly in your implementation, like, all right, go ahead and click on the start menu. When I look at my laptop right now, as we're recording, I don't see start. I think being able to implement technology is to be able to take whatever changes come and be able to teach your students that, you know what, change is not a big deal. It's a part of life. It's a part of software or tools or gadgets.
Exactly.
Along the way.
Exactly. So. And I think I have multiple thoughts again on this one, but I think it's more the adults that have such a difficult time with those changes in operating systems or new technology, or how do I use this particular tool in my classroom. And that's why I loved this article, that it was really talking about teachers have to learn these 21st century skills. So that's just an enormous task to accomplish, in addition to mastering the curriculum and classroom management and everything else that's on their plates. So I think it's important to remember a couple of things. One, remember that most of the time students are not fazed by updates in operating systems, or they're intrigued and curious about any new technology that comes into the room. So it's important for the teachers to model appropriate behavior when they're faced with what they consider to be an enormous challenge. If they panic and shut down, then the students are going to see that, and they'll have a variety of thoughts, I'm sure. But ideally, you want to model the curiosity and questioning that you want your students to have. And I lost my other thought, but it'll come back to me.
Yeah, let's move on to the next point. We've done 2 so far. What's next?
Oh, right. So the next one, I think this one was almost my favorite. The point is being able to foster student relationships. So with all the technology today, all the social media today, how many times wherever you are with young people, do you see them on their cell phones? How many times do you see adults on their cell phones? Not looking at each other, not talking to each other. You can go out to dinner, people are not talking to each other, parents aren't talking to their children. So the fact that this was on this list, being able to foster student relationships, I was jumping up and down. I thought it was just fabulous to remind people, and probably very encouraging to teachers who are hesitant to use technology, encouraging to them that, okay, my whole world isn't changing. Still at the base of everything is the fact that I have a relationship with my students, and I'm going to help them feel good about themselves and have that growth mindset and continue to learn. So it's not going away. It's still a critical piece of effective instruction.
Yeah, and being able to foster those relationships helps those students see the growth mindset, because they have someone who, no matter what, is standing in their corner believing in them. And when they have that, they will fight to not only just try to impress that person, which we do see, but also they will want to live up to the expectation of, or that this person cares so much about me that they are willing to do whatever it takes for me to learn. I want to honor that, and I want to show them that I am worth being honored. So, that helps with being able to achieve a lot in the classroom, because it helps create that safety zone.
Absolutely. And I know of another district in a particular neighborhood where there were very low student achievement rates, and I'm thinking probably high crime, a lot of negatives to this particular neighborhood. And that district intentionally made a change and had a school where it was extended day and a lot of unique programs, but all of these programs encouraged that fostering of a relationship between the teachers and the students. And in that particular neighborhood, students would excel and were quoted as saying that they put in the extra effort and they did what they needed to do because of their relationship with the teacher. That maybe every other relationship in their life was not ideal, but they respected their teacher and they wanted to do well for them. So I just think it's great. And I do want to read directly from this particular bullet where it says, an effective teacher will have the ability to facilitate interpersonal relationships within the classroom so that students have a sense of community and be able to communicate with their peers on a higher level than just social media. This struck home for me because I watch my daughter and all her texting with all of her friends. And thankfully, she is still a very good communicator because of other activities she's been involved with. But it does worry me that in today's world of social media, no one's talking, they're texting. And to be able to have a conversation with somebody is important.
Right.
All right. The next one is to be forward thinking. 21st century educator is able to anticipate the future and plan for it. That's intimidating.
Yeah. So if you're out there and you know the future, I'm wondering who's winning the World Series this year. If you can help me out with that, that would be great, because I will do something I never do, which is bet money on something. But I think the idea behind being forward thinking is not be stuck in the old ways of doing things. It's like the idea that students today aren't the students of when we were in school. We knew coming out of school that there were certain types of jobs, and those jobs are going to be available. And then as time has gone on, each decade, there's been so many changes. And in the last 2 decades, we've gone from believing Al Gore created the internet. That's a joke. I know it's a joke. I know, no, serious. I don't need anyone to tweet back at me saying, he didn't create the internet. You know this. It was kind of a joke because the internet is been around for a while now. But it just keeps growing and growing and growing. It used to be like this little thing that only geeks did in the corner, and now there is a whole world that revolves around social media. Social media was something that's been in the last I'm going to say 5 years, really, even though probably a little bit more than that. But just this idea that all these changes keep coming and coming. And when we think about jobs, back when schools first started, it was to be able to get children, because they weren't allowed to work anymore, they had to learn. Child labor laws. Thank you, child labor laws, for giving us jobs. Students had to be prepared for the future. There would be lots of apprenticeships where you're learning how to do a job. There's still those things going on, but what's happening is that we're preparing students for a future where we don't know what that's going to look like. McDonald's is even trying to cut some of its workforce back by creating robots to cook the food. I mean, it still needs people, but that's even less jobs where you're going to have to start creating your own jobs. And that's one of the things that, especially in the last few years, you're seeing a lot of these artisanal or mom and pop operations that are starting to kind of pop up again. A long time ago, it was, the fear of the Walmarts and the Targets are going to come and take everything over and all the mom and pop stores are going to go away. What they're realizing is they still need the mom and pop stores. Those older ones may have gone away because they weren't able to be forward thinking enough and adapt to what is coming. New ones are starting to pop up which offer different services. And so the old way of thinking, if you were still doing that, your business was likely to close. And I think of things like Blockbuster, Circuit City, Linens and Things. Those are just the 3. And I know Linens and Things because that's where we registered. We registered when we got married 10 years ago. That's where we registered, was at Linens and Things and Target. Only one of those places is still around.
Right. I think everything is changing and it's never going to stop changing. And I think it's scary, right? Mm-hmm. To think as a teacher, you need to prepare your students for a world that you have no idea what that world is going to be like. You're going to have students that are either going to embrace that and say, cool, I can do anything I want and it's going to be okay. Or you could have students that are going to be terrified saying, what do I do? What do I do? So
what's my path?
Exactly. So it's all those other skills that we're talking about, the ability to adapt, the ability to, to have that growth mindset, to know that even if you fail, it's okay. You're going to keep going. It'll be all right. You'll get it eventually. All of this is what students need in order to succeed in this unknown world.
And be forward thinking, which is what this point is all about, makes me jump all the way back up to the beginning, which is what is 21st century learning? The problem solving, critical thinking, digital literacy, collaborate, communicate, skills that will ultimately help students navigate the future. Those are the things that we're teaching. Sure, we're also teaching some underlying skills like how to read, how to add, how to balance a checkbook. Maybe, depending on your school, how to change a tire, how to sew a button. But forward thinking is not being everyone's going to be an academic researcher. Everyone is going to be a doctor. Everyone's going to be a lawyer. That's what they should be going to school for. I don't know how many lawyers we need, but we have a lot of them right now.
I'm sure.
And not everybody wants to be a lawyer. And
right.
So I think forward thinking is preparing students for that unknown.
Exactly.
By getting them these skills that they need to navigate it.
Right. And the final bullet, Mike, I think goes right along with the forward thinking, and it's the ability to embrace change. So yes, you need to be forward thinking, but you automatically, I think, with that are embracing change. And the point that they made that I'm glad they did was that embracing change doesn't refer only to technology, but in education. Everyone listening to this, I know, knows this. Technology changes daily, but so does new teaching strategies, testing techniques, and the way we're able to learn and communicate with others. So I know I went through so many different strategies when I was teaching. I'll say strategies it's a global word. things change in education, and it's the ability to embrace that change. And as I mentioned last week, to just always be open-minded and to think, all right, this one might work. This one might be the best one yet. But to remember that you're always modeling that for your students. I think it's a good thing that nothing is automatically, systematically the same as it was 60 years ago. It's not a clear path in life. We're teaching our students to think, to be creative, and to do what they love. Hopefully, they'll have that opportunity. We're very fortunate to live in this country where we have so many opportunities. So hopefully, this article has been helpful in reminding teachers that we understand they are learning just as much as the students are learning, and to be patient with themselves with all the new technology that we are showing you and modeling for you. We've said this before in many podcasts. Take it one step at a time, and you can do it.
Yeah. Who wins the race, the tortoise or the hare? The tortoise does. So, again, this article is 5 Essential 21st Century Teaching Characteristics. I changed the title there, if you did not notice. Because I still think, even after we've talked all about it, I still think it's more characteristic-based, not strategy-based. So, it was from Teacher Hub, teachhub.com.
Coming up next, our interview with Melissa Zietz.
Hi, I'm Melissa Zietz. I'm an instructional technology teacher at Liberty Elementary School. I've been in the district for over 10 years.
So as an instructional technology teacher, you clearly work with technology. What was it like that first year, 10 years ago? So that would be 2007. So we'll go back that far. You said more than that, but we'll go back that far. So in 2007, what was it like coming into the school in technology?
So when I came to Liberty, we were a magnet school for communication. So there was technology in our building. We had desktops in our building in the classrooms. We also had laptop carts that came within that year. So we were probably one of the first schools that every teacher had a laptop. I was a special ed teacher, so I also had the computers in the classroom.
So with the computers, were there certain programs that you guys ran, with it being a communications magnet? Were there certain requirements that you had to meet to keep that magnet status?
Not sure complete requirements, but we did have a lot of different things. We had the original Lego WeDo kits. I think they had a different name back then. We used Readabout. We had Fast Math. So we were using some computer-based programming, partially because of where I came from, where I taught before here. I also knew about different websites, so the kids were designing books on the laptops, the desktops in my classroom, but not to the extent it is now. It was really kind of what we wanted to do with them.
So a lot less focus, a lot less
district managed, a lot less. It was more exploratory.
All right. So with that, if we jump ahead a few years, and start thinking about when it became laptops in all the classrooms, when students started to have more access to the tools, how did your role change, and what are some of the things that you would implement using any sort of technology?
So once the laptops came in, we started using basic Microsoft products. I mean, when I think about, we had a part-time tech teacher when I had come into this building, and that was really her focus. Very basic things, not necessarily a collaboration piece because it wasn't available then. And then when our grant rolled out and the computers started dying, there was a little bit of a time in between that I was fortunate to get the iPad grant from, I think it was RFI, is what it was through. And that was, my curriculum became totally integrated with the iPad. So everything we did, we were using the iPads for math, for reading, and we started really differentiating the curriculum when the iPads came into my classroom, though. So the school, you saw the computers starting to disappear more because they were dying, and the one-to-one initiative hadn't really started yet. And I don't know how many years, maybe a couple of years, that you could see the transition happening. Now we're second grade through fifth grade is one-to-one, and K and 1 are 1 to 2, 1 to 3.
Mm-hmm. So let's get back to the iPads for a moment, because there was only, I think, 7 or 8 schools in the entire district that were got to be a part of this grant where they had the iPads come in. And you said that you integrated into your classroom. So that leads me to ask this question. What was one of your favorite things that you did that the students really got the most out of using the iPads?
So I liked using the iPads for the creative projects more than just an app. So my students created books, they created book trailers, they created how-to videos to help other students. So they use things like Puppet Pals to retell stories or to explain how to do word problems. So it's more of the creative, using everything they've learned to create a final project.
Nice. Do you still have any of these videos?
Yes, I do.
Do you think you could share them with our listeners? 1 or 2?
I may. I would have to go into my computer and see if they got deleted when we did the whole move to OneDrive. Mm-hmm. But I may still have some of them, yeah.
Because I think a lot of listeners would love to see, like, this is what it was like pre-laptop in every room, pre-Brightspace, pre a lot of stuff that the district is doing now.
Though I have to say, some of you would think they wouldn't be as fancy or whatnot, but because iPads had the capability of doing more, mm-hmm. in some ways, it's taken a while for even when we became one-to-one, to catch up to what the capability of what the iPads could do. Now, there are still things that the iPads can do that the laptops can't do, and then vice versa. Mm-hmm. So it would be interesting. And
I think we'd all like to see that. So let's jump ahead a little bit more in time. Were you an early adopter with Brightspace?
Sort of. I know the first year it came out, I didn't really do a whole lot with it. The way I actually became an adopter is they needed people to type in all of the standardized testing that the district had into the computers.
Oh, I remember those days.
Yes, and so a week mm-hmm. long, I sat there and typed them all, and I learned everything I needed to know on Brightspace, and therefore was able to use it in the classroom.
So for our listeners who don't know, back when Brightspace was introduced, all of the district assessments were paper-based, and there was about 30 of us in a room at Forest Park, and we were given folders full of tests that we had to copy in. Some of the tests came on pen drives, so it made it a little bit easier to do. Others, we had to be creative with how we figured out how to input them into the computer, since, as Melissa was stating, many of the early adopters were a part of this, but as early adopters, we were trying to learn things as we were going. So it was a very adventurous process.
And I will say, I do remember that before even going to that, I watched every Atomic Learn video on Brightspace so I could keep up with what's going on, and found out that Brightspace isn't as complicated as I originally thought it was.
So now that you had that introduction into Brightspace, what was the first tool? Maybe it was the quizzes that you used, but were there any other tools that you were like, this is the first tool I want to make sure I learn how to use well?
It wasn't the quizzes, because I wasn't a classroom teacher. I'm trying to think when I swapped from special ed to technology.
I think this was like 3 years ago now.
Okay, so this is my 3rd year as a technology teacher, I think. So right around that time, I was going into a new role. And really the first thing I used Brightspace for was to direct the kids to a location. So I wanted them to go to ABCYA and create a painting. I put the link into ABCYA. Or if the teachers needed to get on Dreambox with their kids, we'd put the link in. So I'd probably say the first tool was the links. Mm-hmm. And then the greatest tool is the fact that you can copy it all over from year to year, and I don't have to repeat myself.
Yeah, that is a nice tool. So at this point, you became the technology teacher, and in that, you get to do a lot of new things. What were some of the things you were excited about when you moved into this role?
I loved how excited that kids got when they knew they had technology class, because they were excited about learning. What I was excited about getting this role is 10 years ago, or 10 plus years ago, I learned Scratch. And I did it when I worked in an alternative school. And I was excited that I got to bring that aspect back in, too. I also liked that I could do projects with them. Because we sometimes, with all this testing, shy away from projects. And now I can do that big project that a classroom teacher doesn't have time for. Or I can collaborate with them on whatever they're learning and have some nice, cool final display or project.
For our listeners who don't know, what is Scratch?
Scratch is a block-based visual programming application. It was created by MIT students, and it teaches basic programming. So you can teach the kids any concept in any subject, along with teaching them to program.
So let's go down a little bit more of the layman terms, because maybe some of our listeners are like, okay, I don't understand what you just said, but...
All right, so you can, say you're teaching geometry, and you're teaching the students angles and how many sides. You can have the students go into this program, and you can actually physically have them play with different angles and play with different sides to create a shape. And they don't realize it, but they're programming. They're creating an algorithm, series of steps that they need to do to complete a task, which is to maybe make a square.
So it's a way for students to demonstrate their knowledge in using a tool of technology, where instead of just having them go and make a PowerPoint with a picture of a square and saying this is a square because it has the 4 right angles, they actually have to go and make sure their angles are exact, and they can even move things around on there. So coding is one thing that you did bring into the classroom that the students hadn't experienced before. So I imagine you've been doing that since you started in the position. How has that progressed over time?
So now I've really gotten more and more into the coding, and I've also gone into something called a Makey-Makey board. Basically, I'm trying to figure out ways that the students can express what they know or demonstrate what they've learned in whatever way feels comfortable for them. So whether I'm doing coding or even PowerPoint, I want them to do what's comfortable for them, but also push them a little bit to be able to show it. So the best example I can give is that the students were given an assignment to create the food chain of something they like to eat, which was interesting, I will say. And they could choose either PowerPoint or Scratch. If they chose PowerPoint, they were only allowed one slide, and they had to use the animations to actually create the entire food chain. If they chose Scratch, there were different ways that they could do it. Again, Scratch being a program where you can draw pictures of each scene of the food chain and just program it to just go to the next slide, but in this case it's next background. Or they can actually have the characters move and really create an animated movie of a food chain. The Makey-Makey boards are basically like a game controller, and you plug it in to your computer, and the kids can create their own game controller, their own mouse, however you want to call it. So in this case, they created their food item, like feta cheese or ice cream, and they hooked the Makey-Makey boards to the ice cream, and it had to be something that was a conductor. So a lot of them had conductor tape or tin foil, and when you touch it, the movie appears or the PowerPoint begins. That
sounds crazy intense to do. How long does a project like that take?
It took a marking period because there was a lot of research that the kids had to do. They had to understand food chains. They had to understand what their food chain was. They had to create a graphic organizer on how they're going to go about it. And then they had to create it. So
you're really talking about project-based learning here, where the students led their own learning down the path, where they had to figure out the food chain of pizza. I would imagine. I'm guessing pizza was probably pretty popular.
It was not one of the items.
Really?
Yes, because pizza was too complicated. So then they would have had to create the food chain of the cheese, the tomatoes, and the bread. Wow. So we said steak, chicken, ice cream, things that, even though ice cream has more ingredients, I just went with dairy, but things that had few. Sushi.
Few pronounceable ingredients.
Yes.
And so you help guide the kids to that point instead of being like, I'm going to make mine about meat lovers pizza.
Exactly.
So I can't see that one going very well.
And it was interesting because it was a lot of, I'm part of the DLC groups, the digital learning course. So we've been getting sent to these trainings. So some of the SOS strategies that we learned about in the discovery trainings were what I used. And also the science department is now using science scopes. And there are some great tools on how to get the kids thinking about that.
So it sounds like you're a wealth of information in using technology in the classroom. How has it been collaborating with teachers?
The teachers who feel comfortable with the technology in their classrooms have gravitated to creating collaborative projects. My second grade team has been wonderful this year. We've done a global read aloud where we read the BFG, and then we Skyped with other classrooms, one in California and I think one in Indiana, I think it was, and we discussed the book. And then we did some technology projects based off of the book, and we shared it with the other classroom. Along with the BFG takes place in England, so we Skyped a classroom in England. And it was all collaborating. It's very much working together to do it. And we've done in that classroom a few projects where I do a little bit, they're doing the writing piece in the classroom, then they're putting it into a PowerPoint in my classroom. And not is it just with a collaboration with the second grade teacher, but it's always on the science topic that they're doing in science class. So I think it's very important. And right now, fourth grade is doing their Regions green screen movie.
Oh boy.
Based off of the social studies curriculum. The classroom teachers will be doing the scripts and the writing, getting the kids ready. And then I come in and I teach them what green screening is, and we'll start recording them.
And you start through the whole movie making process. That sounds awesome. Are we going to be able to see those?
Not sure we can publicly put the video up, but maybe the auditory.
Yeah. So listeners, look out. You'll maybe find some interesting videos to check out of a lot of great things that are happening in Melissa's classrooms and people that she's working with. So now we get to the last part where you get to think about next year, the next 5 years. What would you love to see, not just your school, but maybe the whole district start gravitating towards in regards to using technology?
My biggest thing with technology is there are so many great tools out there. There are great Office 365 and Brightspace and Padlet and all of this stuff. But we as a district need to learn how to integrate technology into the classroom so it is not disrupting the child's learning, it's enhancing it. It's not a burden for a teacher to add something else on their plate, because I know that we all have so much on our plate. It's the idea that we can use it comfortably with that, and really integrate it into what we're doing. And I do like project-based learning, and I do like collaborating because it's the best way to produce a project. But I think that would be great to see. I am a fan of computer science. I have no science background. I did not go to school for science. I did not go to school for math. I actually went to school for history, and I'm learning it. And I think I see the potential that it could have, and I really hope as a district that the computer science is not something we shy away from, but we truly look at and see how it really can benefit the students, and we can integrate it into our curriculum, especially through the computational thinking piece.
So my final question today, hopefully it'll be an easy one. If you had the opportunity to stand at a new hire meeting where when I was hired, I don't know if it was like this when you were hired, but I was hired a little bit more recently than you were. We were all in a room together, and we had people talking to us for a week straight about everything that goes on in the district. If you had a chance to talk to those new teachers and using technology, or maybe even the teachers who have been here for a while who shy away from it, who are a little tech averse, what would you say to them or advise them to do to getting to use technology in their classroom?
What I say to all the teachers here that I've worked with is start small. I think that's what we need to think about. Start small. Once you get that one thing, add to it, and then push yourself. Because otherwise it can become overwhelming. So I know there's one teacher, I remember introducing her to Kahoot, and she loves it. And since then, she's added more and more things, but it's getting comfortable with that one thing and learning it. Maybe it's Brightspace, maybe it's Discovery videos, maybe it's just using Padlets. But once you get there, push yourself to try something else. And I also think that we live in a world where collaboration is becoming more and more important. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And there are some great people like the one I'm talking to who knows a lot of resources. And there are a lot of people out there that you can ask questions. And if you don't feel comfortable asking someone within the district on how to integrate technology, I just recently gone into tweeting. And I personally don't tweet, but I go on Twitter and I look at all these great projects that people are doing with technology. And I'm like, oh, I can integrate that into my classroom. I know how I can get this to work. It's out there.
Well, thank you for your time today. This has been very informative. Our listeners will love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was a very interesting interview with Melissa Zietz over at Liberty School.
Great interview, Mike.
There's a lot of great things we can pull out of that. As you can tell, she's very passionate about using technology in the classroom, and she comes at it. I think I even said at one point in the interview, like she's a plethora of ideas on how to use technology. And at Liberty, they're very blessed to have her there because she is a wealth of information.
And what I love about Melissa is that even though she has a lot of experience with technology, more than 10 years, she still is the first person to say, take it slow, find one thing you're comfortable with, take baby steps. Loved her quote about Brightspace. It's not as complicated as she thought it was going to be. Keep that in mind. I put that up in my cube. But she's full of enthusiasm.
Yeah, I remember a couple years ago being at a technology coordinator meeting, and she was presenting Scratch and coding and how she was doing it with her third graders. And I was teaching fifth grade. I'm like, she's doing it with third graders. I could totally do this with fifth graders. And so just like being able to talk to her and get more information about how to go about doing that. And we ended up doing it, and it was one of the most exciting ends of the years that I've had teaching, because we did it at the end of the year. And so the students got to really, like, we were all done with all of our major testing. So we spent a lot of time problem solving and learning how to do it and going through lessons. Students were completely engaged into it. And just like anytime I visited her classroom, the students are completely engaged into whatever she is doing. And so to me, like, I think when she talks about like not being afraid to ask people questions, like that's huge.
Right. Collaboration is key. I can't say that enough. I feel like I say that at least every day to myself, that people need to work together. We need to collaborate. We need to share all of our great ideas. We need to help each other, support each other, teach each other. That's the only way we're going to get things done.
So now we're coming up to our feedback section of the week, and a lot of feedback again has been verbal, and we would love it if you went on to iTunes, or we're now on Stitcher, so you could go there too, or Google Play if you can find the podcast there. Even though it posts there, I still have yet to be able to actually figure out where it is. Or any of the other sites where the podcast is hosted, and leave us a review written there. It helps us. It helps us remember what you say when you tell us that you like listening to us and you like hearing the things that we talk about. We had one person talk about Again, this was actually more the blog talking about SAMR, and so we've had a few people comments that they were very thankful we went a deep dive into SAMR when we talked about it a month or two back than when it appeared again on the blog. You can also find us on Twitter. I am Mike, SPS-DLA. Suzanne is at Suzanne, SPS-DLA. We are easily reachable there too. I've been going out there, and as the week has gone on, any interesting article I've read that we haven't talked about, I've actually retweeted or put a little like next to. And so we're there, we're active. We use Yammer too. I've been corresponding with teachers about using Microsoft Classroom, and so just what it does and how it's different than Brightspace. We are very accessible, and we are here to help you in integrating technology into your classroom. That is a big part of what we love, and that's a big part of what we want to be doing. I'm Mike Thomas.
I'm Suzanne Zargis.
And we'll see you next week.